Good. So we are going to begin today. We'll begin with a prayer, but we are looking at science, consciousness, and ultimate reality with a particular essay by Alan Torrance. Um, but we're going to begin with a prayer as we dive into what all this says to the world we live in. So we do thank you, our God, that you bring scholars to come and help us wrestle with the value of a theological voice in a world today that is in many ways contending for the truth. Help us to be those who are your servants and thinking through, advocating for what is good and true, and letting the voice of truth be heard in the world. So bless our conversation, all that we say and do. We pray in your name, you who is Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Amen.
Amen.
Hello, young El. How are you
Hello.
today?
Sorry, I'm a little late.
That's okay. We were discussing a few other things. Ken is always full of points of things to be discussed. So
A pretty disgusting person.
I have lost the ability for some reason. My AI companion is not letting me record. I don't know what I would have done that would have stopped it. So people are just going to have to watch the video, which then allows for a transcript. It's not a summary to be done. But anyway, I will keep. I was inquiring on Zoom as to how to do that. But anyway, looking today at this book, just a couple of notes. The original production of these essays, the introduction says this volume arises out of the events by the scientific and medical network between November 2001 2003, the aim of the Science, Consciousness, and Ultimate Reality Project, supported by a generous grant from John Templeton Foundation, was to examine issues at the interface between science, religion, and the relatively new field of consciousness studies. And it goes on somewhat from there and talks about the nature of the speakers that were invited. There were 5 different sessions that led up to what was going on. Consciousness studies, Ken Wilber summarized in schools of thought that include cognitive science, introspectivism, neuropsychology, individual psychotherapy, social psychology, clinical psychiatry, developmental psychiatry, psychosomatic medicine, non-ordinary states of consciousness, Eastern and contemplative traditions, quantum consciousness, and subtle energies research. Which, I mean, to cover these things would be, somewhat phenomenal. Every one of them, I'm sure, has a defined sense of what it is that they're looking at within the question that we're looking at today. On another page, it says, did you want to say something?
David Lorimer, who's the editor here,
Yes.
is Scots. Is not in the traditional religion of the Scots. He was, or might continue to be, a Swedenborgian. It's a interesting subset of Christian theology, but it is the kind of place where consciousness is more important than spirituality or knowledge of God. Consciousness is a very big thing in Swedenborgian. The mother church of American Swedenborgianism is about 10 miles from here. And I grew up with their bells ringing in my ears.
Well, that is all very interesting. There's a broad spectrum of authors in this, and Alan, of course, steps in as a Christian theologian and names that. He talks about theists, but he specifically mentions a Christian theist. So just a few of the issues addressed during the project were, and I'll just read a few of them. How might a new science of consciousness contribute to moral, spiritual, and scientific progress? So the looking ahead. Is there any validity in means of obtaining knowledge other than through the 5 senses? What is the relationship between the self or consciousness and the brain? How do you justify your position on the question? And on what basis do you reject other positions? Is there any evidence value in near-death experiences that might relate to this question? And there's another 7 of them that are listed there. So just to say that, you've got people from many traditions, as you say, some more in the scientific realm, some coming from psychology, neuroscience, so forth like that. The editor then has a section here dealing with each of the particular articles and just gives kind of a summary look. So he says, Alan Torrance addresses the question, does naturalism in the cognitive science constitute a crisis for theism? Before coming to theism, he gives an analysis of what he sees as a challenge, if not a crisis, for the academy in the form of two mutually incompatible but nevertheless materialistic approaches. And so he talks about naturalism, gives a survey of that, and then enlightenment, humanism, creative anti-realism, and social constructionism. So he's got a paragraph on each of those. Torrance argues both these approaches are seriously deficient when compared with theism. There's got a long paragraph on that going into issues of thought that have been there. And then on the next page, Torrance sees a third alternative to physicalism and Cartesianism in Nancy Cartwright's pluralistic universe. So it goes through some discussion on that. Torrance concludes that academia is rent between the mutually incompatible fideisms of naturalism and creative anti-realism. He argues that theism can obviate problems associated with these views and that it sustains and justifies the academic search for truth. And then he goes on to talk somewhat more about that. And then a final paragraph, he argues that Christian theism's explanatory power should not be underestimated. It recognizes the complexity of selves as subjects, not objects, subjects who are free, responsible, personal agents who can reason and penetrate the intelligible structures of the world. Theism must also recognize physicality, that emotions can be chemically induced and that mental processes are subject to physical degeneration. Torrance does not claim to have arrived at a definitive account of agency and causality, but does show the direction in which a solution is likely to be found. He concludes that if the agenda of a theistic account of human agency is challenging, then the challenges facing a naturalistic account are arguably greater still. So just outlining a little bit of the overarching sense of what it is that is seen of this particular discussion within this conversation. So does anyone have any opening thoughts you want to throw out there just to help orient in your reading? Why was this an important article? What does he do really tying into T.F. Torrance's tradition of thinking that helps us to recognize the Torrance tradition can be seen in people like Alan Torrance to be expanding out into areas that T.F. did not go into? And what does it open up in our language about thinking as theological thinkers, particularly engaging in the world of the sciences?
Sorry. The first association I had was with George Marsden.
Okay.
George Marsden is historian of American fundamentalism, historian of the emergence of evangelicalism within American Christianity in the 1920s, 1930s, the emergence of an institution like Fuller Theological Seminary, where Jeffrey Bromley ended his career, as a place where Torrance and his scientific theology approach resonated well with a lot of people at Fuller as a mediating theology to allow them to leave behind the thought forms of fundamentalism, which are Cartesian and rationalistic, and move to a much more evangelical, open system model. Marsden published the best biography of Jonathan Edwards. And that's his, nowadays people, half the crowd who buy his books read his book on fundamentalism, half of them read his one on Jonathan Edwards, where he demonstrates that Edwards was not a Cartesian rationalist in the way that fundamentalism would become, which rescues Edwards for a big chunk of the American evangelical church. He published 2 books. He edited one on the soul of the American university, and published a book on the soul of the American university. You can see that he already 20 years ago, which is contemporary with this article, was probing, can a modern American university also be religious? Can a religious college be considered modern? And there was a real tension, because I think it was Carnegie would pay universities, build libraries for them if they would not hire Protestant ministers to be their presidents. He wanted scientific, non-theological education to move forward, and theology could be one chair over in the humanities department. The humanities and sciences were rather strongly set off against each other by World War II, and for a lot of people, rational, scientific, naturalistic explanations are far favored in higher education than more humanistic, centered, older ways of interpreting faith and life and civic life and politics and constitution. It's again James Davison Hunter, and his book, very recent book on democracy and oh, I'm sorry, I can't see anymore. Give me a second.
Okay.
Here it is. Democracy and Solidarity. He in his own way, the whole center section of this book is an intellectual history of American thinking on the tension between being Christian or religious at all, and also being a citizen in the American Republic. And he, in his own way, also found the same things that Alan Torrance was finding by his reading of American writers talking about how we talk about thinking, what is academically respectable research into thinking, and what is just humanism with papered over with some polysyllabic words. Hunter, from his perspective, and Torrance, from his perspective, asked the same question. Can a place like Harvard or Columbia, with its huge investment in the humanities done in the traditional style, and its huge investment in scientific research, which is what the US government is paying for and is threatening to cut off funding for, colliding because they cannot talk about values. They take 2 different assumptions about how to argue values, and that is, a lot of people are saying, as much as they're rooting for Harvard and free speech, they got to say, but the dilemma that is creating the opening for Harvard's enemies to begin to pound in there and say you've betrayed your trust as a scientific university if you keep going with these humanities values and talk about human life and value and all these things in ways that you and I would consider quite traditional. The value and the worth of humanity, and what is the ethical thing to do. And he in his way also cites several of the same people that Alan Torrance cites, but I would doubt very much that Dr. Hunter knows much about Alan Torrance at all. It is a real thing. And this is why I was so excited to read this, to see, oh, good. They're asking, other people are asking the same questions. And from my reading of theological science in particular, but our reading together through several of Tom's books, where he is very, very carefully defining what he means by human, by thinking, by concepts, by theory and practice, is laying out a far more universal method of being rational than Romanticism or Cartesian rationalism have been able to put forward. So as Cartesian rationalism is now almost universally rejected, and the humanities has jumped to Romanticism as a more humanistic place to do their work than trying to do anything scientifically, like over in the scientific areas. And Tom would be the first one to say, you don't have to do that. And trying to recall the humanities back to what Alan Torrance here will call a theistic interpretation, that you do not need to discard theism in order to be scientific. What a enormous emancipation for the humanities at major universities if they could just talk to one another. And here's one more example of how that is getting done.
What is the language of Romanticism that it has gone to? I mean, what?
That for the first, you stop talking theology and start talking religion. You don't talk about the church. You talk about religiosity or spirituality. Yeah. It's trying to find a more, it's not even ecumenical. It is a more humanistic, sympathetic to religion, but not based in religion. It is a pluralistic, but the term that shows up here is to say, religious adjacent. Hunter talks about, so from the 1920s through the 1960s, it was assumed that higher education was religious tolerant. From the 1960s onwards, it has become almost anti-religious. And this is what Marsden picks up on in his books. He says that this is utterly unnecessary, and they are doing, why are they doing this? And it's because the intellectual model of respectability is this subjectivistic emotionalism. Andrew Purvis, when he got to Duke University about 40 years ago, and he had studied with Tom Torrance in New College. And in New College, Andrew was considered a liberal. I mean, he had a very different doctrine of scripture from the fundamentalists and the conservative evangelicals, and his sense of piety was very different. But the first time I saw him, he said, I don't know how the Duke Divinity School is training any ministers for the church. Because I talk to these people and I ask them a theological question. They say, well, I'll meditate on that for a while. And then they go out and sit under a tree and write a poem. Sitting under a tree and writing a poem as a valid research method into insights about God and Jesus Christ? Question mark. That's the emotional subjectivism.
Okay, and Romanticism. Good, thank you for that clarification. Yeah, so it's raising a question just about how intellectual traditions in the United States arrived where we are, but also the invitation to say, you know, what is possible going forward, and to what degree does the Torrance tradition provide, you know, language and thought structures that make possible intelligent conversations that neither discount the world of the physical nor the world of thought, cognitive, you know, that whole dimension and what it looks like. So Alan himself has retired from St. Andrews now, but has always been somebody, when he steps on the stage, there's nobody that can kind of talk in a way that anyway dismisses whatever he says. So I always find him delightfully both humorous, but also serious in a way that is somewhat cloaked by his ability to be humorous, because he is seriously committed to this pursuit of truth, the pursuit of congenial conversations that listen, show problems that are there, leave doors open for how do we go forward together. So there's no arrogance in the way that he presents things, but there is a pointing out, yeah, that's not going to work very well, and here's why. Let's find a way forward. So, and I think this article represents that kind of thinking. Did you have any thoughts, Young Il?
I guess I'm just not in this field, that the terminology is, you know, something that I'm kind of getting used to.
Yes.
And I really appreciate your pointing out the word consciousness has a very specific meaning in this context. I was just thinking consciousness as in, we are conscious, the superficial kind of thing. I didn't know the whole strata of the philosophical basis that you represent. So that's very interesting to me because
Yes.
I guess what he points out does seem to be a reality,
Yep.
that the dichotomy of the two cultures, as it were, the scientific, the naturalistic basis, and then the humanities, which is more, as you said, subjective, postmodern kind of a thing. But I always thought that there was kind of an underlying unification that
Mm.
was anti-theistic, right? That the modern science, not the original, kind of has a position that says we don't need God as a hypothesis. And in that regard, humanities is the same. We don't need God as a hypothesis. The
Yep.
consequences are different. However, I think in the humanities, it becomes kind of whatever you think, right? It's like everything is relative.
Yep.
There are no values except what I value, that kind of a thing. Whereas in the sciences, it's a little bit better, I think, because of the search for truth is still there, even if it is kind of hidden in multiple ways, like in the psychology and social science. It's kind of debatable whether there how you can search for truth, right? But
Yeah. The word reductionism becomes a critique. They're reduced to things that appear to be, in a sense, like the natural world, but they're made so reductionistic that everything has to be just the physical, which eliminates the nature of the world of what we would call the humanities, because it doesn't
right,
fit the criteria of the physicality, or it has to be collapsed into it. So that collapsing into becomes reductionistic and stops the conversation about the meaningful interaction that Torrance tries to get across between the dualism of the world of the physical and the world of the mental. And there's all kinds of words that he uses, but it's a basic premise of all of T.F. Torrance's work that there are those who say what's really real is the physical, or what's really real is the mental, all that. And so this even came up last week when we looked at Eric's work. So generally speaking, the world isn't kind of aware of this. Alan Torrance once said, every university has like two lobes of the head. And it's this physical versus the mental, the
hmm
humanities. And as you just pointed out, he says in this article, the thing that they hold in common is their resistance to theism.
right,
That's what holds them together. So that's a resistance that isn't really a foundation to build on. Having a common enemy is not enough to ask the question, how can the university and the world become constructive in asking about the facilitation of humanity generally going on and persons within it? How does that all work out? And especially if the question is asked, what does it mean to be a person? And the naturalist says, well, you're that physical being there, and all of your actions and everything can only be understood as physical manifestations. And then for the humanities to see everything as constructed, that we, in a Cartesian kind of world, everything is
hmm
in our heads.
hmm
We have created all the structures of everything. There's nothing that's really real. We've just projected our categories onto it. Then you have something that's lost touch with what we might call, the actual world of physicality and all the dynamics that are there. So we're left with this splitting headache, right?
yes, yes,
And so I was in New Zealand working on my PhD on a comparison of three anthropologies on what does it mean to be free persons. I was part of a postgraduate representative of the faculty, so I sat next to a person at a lunch for this committee, and he said, so what are you doing? And I described, and he says, isn't that all old news? God of the gaps. I said, why are people still talking about that? So this is a, I mean, it is the equivalent of one of the great universities of the UK the University of Otago has that same kind of reputation as being a leading research university. The first dental school that ever was separated from the medical school in the world was at the University of Otago. So it's been a school that is progressive, but it just at that point was a recognition that there is this complete sense of we can be scientific and therefore we can't talk about anything that deals with persons from a theological perspective. So I certainly have experienced that it's real. It's interesting, at the University of Washington, they were actually teaching Bible for many years. It was the church who came and said, you don't have the authority to teach the Bible the way we want. We want you to stop teaching the Bible, which the University of Washington did then. So there's the church stepping in an unhelpful way, rather than conversing, how do we work together and have conversations with university students. So the tragedy is, the church was getting in the way, instead of what Alan has identified as these two secular modes of attempting to get at what is real, what is true, and how does the academy provide for humanity to do something, which that is an undergirding question. What is the role of the university for the world? It certainly does research in a variety of areas, but research towards what end is certainly a question worth asking. And certainly the world of medicine and all those things, technology, there are things that are able to be done in universities. The question of the nature of the humanities, again, my friend he's the head of the religion department at the University of Washington, he said, this was about 2 years ago, I think, at the University of Washington, we had more money given to us in grants and all that than any other university in the United States. The notice on that appeared on the third page of the Huskies, the UW Huskies, the third page of the paper of our newspaper that goes out. He says there's a total, kind of disregard, not valuing that we are, the number one research university in the United States. It gets put to the third page, and parents more and more are coming saying, can my son or daughter get a job if they do a program with you? And he says, I think he said like 5 years ago, he would have had 200 or so students a year. It's a university of about 43,000 students. So 200 incoming students in his department. He said in that year, there were 30. So there's a general sense of a loss of the value of the humanities in the university. And again, the University of Washington's it's a pretty major university. It's ranked, like in the top 10 in the world on many of its programs. So, all
I
that
think
to
that's
say, go ahead.
I think you make an interesting comment, though. The perceived lack of value and why students are not going into the humanities.
Yes.
Maybe it's related to their philosophical orientation, right? Perhaps because they are not dealing with reality and addressing, what the average person sees as problems, but instead are in a completely different domain where everything is a social construction, except the way I'm doing it, of course, is real, right?
Yes.
Then
Absolutely.
it just seems like fluff. It just doesn't seem like there's anything to grab onto uh, that is solid, right? So why would somebody want to spend time and money doing that? So
Yeah. Well, it goes back to the question Ken raised just about values, the loss of the capacity to talk about values. So the students who are coming in and the parents who are funding the education want to know that their son or daughter is going to have a job that pays a certain amount of money. And the question of can you make a difference in the world, which at one point people would go to university because they wanted to make a difference in the world. So to say a general shift away from that would say that a materialistic view of why one gets an education has taken over. An economic motivation has become the predominant motivation. And all of those things say that the people who are willing to pay the big money are those who can sell products, that the sciences, the physical sciences, largely are developing. And the question, so what are you doing in the humanities? You're just training my son or daughter to go to a third world country and start a nonprofit organization to help out who? It all just gets lost. So the question of values is certainly central. And the question, is there a point at which we say we've lost our humanity? We've so produced a machine format, play into the machine, be a part of the machine, that we're literally sacrificing our humanity.
Yeah, and that comes back to, I think, as a society then, or as a community, what do we value, right?
Yes.
Clearly, everybody needs a job because they need to eat and, survive. But the question is beyond that, right? Once you have beyond that, then what do you value? Do you value music? Do you value art? Do you value something? I mean, why do so many young people or
He froze.
Back. Well, one of the, I have to cover his point, I hope. For me, again, Hunter points out that for much of the 20th century, the American philosopher John Dewey, it was
it's
his,
me or
Yeah, it was you. You were frozen. You were stuck there like this.
for about a
You're
minute.
making this really important point, and your hand was right here.
All right.
now I
So,
can hear you.
so I'm agreeing with you, even though I couldn't hear you. It's not that there are no values, that there is a plurality of values and no way to mediate among them. Alan picks out the two biggest, the schizophrenia of the academic world between humanities and sciences, and they stopped talking to each other. I went to a school where there was a faculty of humanities and a faculty of science, but they encouraged everybody to cross-register at least once in their time at the school. They did not want two separate student bodies, one of them with getting a BS in science and the other getting a BA in arts. And so I frequently was tutoring chemistry majors in Shakespeare. It got awkward. But the Dewey, as a religious philosopher, wanted to have a religion-friendly, practical, democratic philosophy. And many politicians and many people interested in public life found that a very friendly place to go. And if you put John Dewey in there for your philosopher and Reinhold Niebuhr as your theologian, you could have a very productive conversation that included 80% of the population of the United States. And democracy could go forward because we trusted one another to vote the right things. What Hunter is saying, that since the turn of the 21st century, that consensus has broken down. Dewey is not read anymore. He sounds charmingly naive in many cases. And I was just looking at George Marston and his books. So he's still, I mean, you can tell from the title, he thinks the enemy is secularization. I don't think it is, because it's not that science is not religious and humanities are superstitiously religious or ridiculously mystical. And it's that they are operating with very vastly different assumptions about the basic reality of things, which Alan gets to very well here. And based on those premises, the opposing people cannot possibly be right, and they cannot be tolerated. And this movement in in conservative states to get unwoke, to de-wokeify their schools and colleges, is they poorly expressed and rather in a rather annoying bigotry against feminism and other things. They pounce and they say, "I hear you saying all values are relative, and your values are more important because you feel them more passionately." Well, bull on that. I'm saying no. You cannot teach that in this school. Get out. the solidarity gets lost. How do you make sense of yourself as an academy, as Alan pleads here, where you've always understood that the academy was not it was real, it was possible, it was extremely valuable. In fact, it may be the most valuable thing a civilization can do is educate its next generation in the values of the previous generation, and in tolerance and in charity and in open-mindedness. And theism, and I can say the Christian church, after learned in the long struggle between Protestantism and Catholicism that you could not defeat the enemy by just yelling at them or slaughtering them on the battlefield. You had to outthink and out-argue, and you had to do so in a non-threatening and in a compassionate way. And now I got probably 100 books by Roman Catholic scholars, and probably many more that I didn't know they were Roman Catholic. The whole urgency of keeping that barrier up dropped after the Second World War and everybody's experience in the Second World War. But with that drop, now there's a question, well, now how do we do theology? How do we teach Bible in a secular context? You can teach the Bible as a secular text, but you're not teaching the Bible we would recognize as the Word of God. And that is a real problem. And since the liberal churches have relied on the colleges and universities to train their children in religious values, a basic humanism, and a basic reliance on democracy to achieve public ends, and the colleges and the universities are not able to do that anymore, they don't know what to do. At least the Roman Catholics have Catholic schools and Catholic universities. So they can just say, well, pull back, people. Don't go to Harvard, go to Georgetown. We'll get you a good education. You'll still get a good job, and you'll also get a good Catholic education.
Seattle University closed its Department of Theology. The School of Theology literally shut down two summers ago.
Wow.
It's not in that faculty. So a Jesuit school in Seattle. So again, there's a loss of something even there.
Yeah.
But again, beyond what you're saying, I'd say the individualism of the United States, that philosophy of the right of the individual over against everyone else is, a deeper problem, and it's a loss of understanding the person, which is kind of central to this essay that he has here. And you used the words which were perfect. Everyone wants to be right. The last verse in the book of Judges, everyone did what was right in their own eyes. That is individualism gone to its logical conclusion, where the university can no longer be unified, and therefore division is inevitable down literally to every person virtually against everyone else.
Oh.
We're not quite there yet, but the nature of the loss of education for the common good, that an educated population is, everyone is safer in a population where people have been educated in some basic values and the ability to have skills within it. And there may be some people who can't work, based on age or, limiting physical factors, but we recognize that they are persons. So it's back to the value of persons, and to acknowledge, those who can, let's find ways to equip them to do what they can do, and those who can't, who we are is at stake. As those who care for people. So the broader question of, what is the role of the university in the humanities, is there's a core value there that we are teaching people to be good humans. And part of that is to do scientific research into every area possible, in medicine, into the nature of the world, and to care for it so that we don't destroy it, so that it can no longer sustain us, and to keep from becoming extinct different species of beings, and maybe even theologians.
Alan points out that European liberal culture, small L, was taught in the universities and in especially in Germany, based on neo-Kantian principles. That Kant's philosophy of religion and his philosophy of ethics created enough common ground that people were able to talk ethics among each other and at least make ethical propositions and the like. And that is the atmosphere in which Barth was educated, Karl Barth. And some of the most prominent neo-Kantians in Germany were at Marburg, where Bultmann and Barth and lots of other people went. And that was what collapsed with the First World War. In the United States, we did not have a war that burned our cities. And as I was saying, Hunter says John Dewey functioned as that kind of a philosopher of the people. And his books were bestsellers in the general middle-class educated population, still mostly white, still mostly middle class. But Reinhold Niebuhr was an equally popular American theologian. But slowly, over on the right, alternative ways were forming to be religious and to do politics. And that it wasn't until Jimmy Carter that that mainline Protestant people realized that they had lost control of the conversation, that people were not listening anymore, and that alternative ways of speaking and alternative authorities of spirituality, Pentecostal, evangelical, but almost all of them Baptist, or that is to say, individualized in their spirituality, had taken over a big chunk of the American population. I'd say at this point, it's almost a quarter of the population of America. Even the Roman Catholic Church began to feel the heat. They knew they needed to do something. But this is why this first few pages of this essay, he touches on Richard Rorty. Richard Rorty shows up in this book as the public philosopher to replace John Dewey. He doesn't recommend him. He says, I don't think he's right. But it was essentially to say, you could not just dummy down the spirituality of the late 19th century and bring it into the 20th century under pious nostrums and expect people to believe it and live by it and dedicate themselves to it. It didn't work. We were not able to make sense of our American democracy, and we have not been able to make sense of our American academy. Things are flying in all directions. It was so gratifying for me to find somebody who I respected, because I respect his work. It says, this is a real problem. We're not playing here. When the Nazis got in Germany and they said, some people are better than others, that did not mean we would talk politely to them, but we would just not let our daughters marry into that family. It meant they went to concentration camps to be systematically destroyed. That is what it led to. And there are now tent camps being built all over the United States by people who say these people can never be mainstreamed into our society. They must be isolated and removed. At the moment, they're building tents. But there's a final solution that's a lot worse, and there's nothing to stop them. How did we lose?
There's the questions of morality. The church has not sustained a role. Even people like Billy Graham sustains a sense that there are good things that one would do. But who are the philosophers today? Are people really encouraged to take philosophy classes in college, or is that not? Oh, you're going to take a philosophy class. What good's that going to do you? So
that and a little hat in Starbucks is what you're going to be doing.
So anyway, there's a need for a revitalization. I mean, when you talk about the history of humanity, to say Kant and Descartes and Hume and all that, these are philosophers. So to say there is a sense in which good philosophers shape history and bad ones shape it too.
Yeah.
So I'm beginning a class, in September on faith integration with psychology and a doctor's psychology program at Northwest University. And where will I begin? We're going to talk about what is science because it's in the Department of Social and Behavioral Science. And so instead of beginning by saying, let's talk about what faith is, we're going to start by talking about what science is and then talk about the nature of science as a function of faith in engaging a world that is there. I mean, I'll use Torrance kind of language that has recognizable patterns and there's a nature of the intelligibility of what goes on. And when we do integration of theology and science, we're going to work within that kind of investigative science investigates the world as it is. And we make choices about what we notice and how we live in relation to those things. And they need not be choices that set competitions up, but that there's a working together within them. So I think that they're really important pieces, and I'm just learning as I go in my own professional settings to try and bridge between them. The opening line, just in the introduction, it is commonplace to draw attention to the challenges which naturalistic assumptions characteristic of much of contemporary science pose to Christian theism. So to say the world asks the question, has science proved this? Is to show that default of naturalism over against theism, the nature of what the Christian opinion might be.
Yeah.
What is less commonly noted is the extent to which naturalism threatens the fundamental suppositions definitive of the contemporary academy, and furthermore, its incompatibility with the affiliations of large sections of the humanities. So he's already laying the foundation. There's a splitting headache in the universities and between the universities and the Christian church, and all of it creates an untenable situation, which he calls quandaries that emerge as to how we correlate certain presuppositions in the natural sciences with wider presuppositions as to what it is to be human. So there is at stake here the nature of humans as scientists and humans as those who do psychology and the social sciences that are giving away without really talking about it, what it means to be human. And again, I think this is where Torrance, with his understanding of Jesus as the personalizing person and the humanizing human, does lay a starting point that is not there as a fixed foundation within the current academic division between what is real, the physical world or the mental world, without really pursuing the interrelation of them.
Yeah, and Tom's point in theological science is you do not need to convert someone to Christianity to be able to help them think things through in their experience of life and what science is for them. He, in addressing the church, is able to say, don't think you have nothing to say to science. You've got a lot to say on all sorts of different levels. And I was almost amused that when laying out the dilemmas of the modern academy, he had the various humanities people talking to various humanities people about whether or not you could prove what thinking is, or is there even a mind, or are we all just a bunch of synapses firing, and saying that is the modern version of what Scottish philosopher David Hume challenged the Enlightenment to do. He said the Enlightenment was breaking down the old medieval theologies, and they were also taking out Rene Descartes and saying this is not philosophy. Kant especially was very critical of Cartesian rationalism because that is to say Descartes, could not prove his basic premise that being rational was better than being something else. He couldn't do it. On it would go. The essential dilemma has not gone away. It has just changed its coat. But it's probably on the 15th or 20th time since. So nobody reads Hume anymore, maybe, but they still have the problem that Hume pointed to. That you must be able to demonstrate your fundamental premises or you cannot find intellectual unity with someone else. And unity is what we're questing at this point. We used to be able to take unity for granted. We were just trying to negotiate how you can belong to this unity without sacrificing your own individuality. He says now Nietzsche is the prophet of the new age. He is saying there are no values, nobody really exists, and the one who will win is the one who yells the loudest. And now there are entire factions of American politics who take that seriously. They just yell the loudest. They've given up trying to apologize or make any explanations. They say it's because that's what we want to do, and we can.
Yeah. And T.F. Torrance, when he talked about why John McMurray should be knighted, his first point was the unity
Yes.
of the universe, that we begin with a unified sense and then we begin
Yes.
to articulate it.
Yes.
And what he also in that same letter said was his great Gifford lectures, which the first book, The Self as Agent, is to say the Cartesian and Romantic, which are these two problems, have divided the world and made the human an agent separate from the world and the individual. And so he then says, now we recognize the problem in book one. Book two, persons and relation. The nature of who we are as persons is from the beginning who we are in relation, starting with the mother-child relationship, and the nature of what grows in learning to live in the world, what he calls the discrimination of the other, is the foundations of science. This is milk, this is water. This, do you want cookie or do you want this? And that all of the language that ultimately develops into our sciences, where we engage, we are curious, we learn to speak about and live with the world, it happens all in these foundational relationships. And the nature of love is to care for one another and the world in which we live. And the nature of fear is to separate and to begin to distrust the other, to fight for oneself over against the other. So he talks about the point where a child begins resisting. And so he's saying that emotions actually precede our intellect. And to save from fear is one of his essays. If we live in a world that's all fear, everyone will live behind walls and masks, and we will never have authenticity. In a world where we learn to love and care for one another with our differences, that is a world where community is possible. In a world where everyone has walls and masks, we'll call that society. Everyone's managed. You stay in your place. Here are the laws. Here's the hours you can do this and that. But society will never sustain humanity, only the capacity to become community. And I think that's true in what Alan is saying here. And Alan's the one who actually gave me the suggestion of doing my doctorate on John McMurray, John Zazoulis, and Karl Barth on the nature of persons as a foundation for engaging these kind of questions, for which I am forever grateful that he put me onto McMurray, because not many people seem to read McMurray, and yet he has thought through these questions at deep levels. And I even sense McMurray in the recognition of the structures that Alan is laying out in this article. So in the introduction, again, he's just laying out the problem of the division, the problem of the discounting of one group versus the other, the crisis that it creates in the university, and the nature of really an anti-realism that we can call naturalism. They think they're super realistic, but they're not dealing with a major part of reality. The fact that even they are thinking to do their naturalistic work. And then there's social constructionism, which makes everything in the head and grants no value, in a sense, to the physical world. So the problem is significant there. He goes on and discusses Plantinga, which my claim to fame with Plantinga is he came to New Zealand and he took my bike for a ride up Signal Hill, which is a ride there in Dunedin, New Zealand. So the other Plantinga, his brother, Neil Plantinga, I took Systematic Theology 1 at Fuller in Seattle from his brother, Neil Plantinga. So I have a little bit of connection to the Plantingas, though he didn't have as much effect as this Plantinga has. But the nature of what Plantinga's work has been done is just to clarify the not need to collapse into one or the other, that this is a of reductionism of the world to categories that need not be divided into, and that there's something that needs to be held together. So that on 199, more relevant to our purpose here, this is the top paragraph, is the fact that it raises highly problematic questions vis-a-vis the place of truth within a university. And truth and values, I think, go together, Ken, with what you're saying, that where there is truth, there is a valuing of truth and the values that come from that. So I don't see those as separate, they're held together. Not least in the very status of scientific truth claims. And so again, this goes back to what is the university there for? There needs to be some sense that a university makes truth claims that we can depend upon. That's why people say, has science proved this? Right? But we haven't paid attention to the nature of what it means to be persons or humans, beings in relation. We've allowed individualism to see everything in its atomized forms of structuring. So there are at least two reasons for this. First, to the extent that it involves what one might term accountability to reality. And again, I just heard T.F. Torrance in that statement that ultimate beliefs begin with there has to be reality. And ultimately, it teaches us, we don't categorize it into what's convenient for us. It has the authority, in a sense, over us. So that's a very Torrancean kind of position. Only has a place in the kind of universe in which naturalists envisage or assume, to the extent that it has an evolutionary function. So here's, I think, what he's identifying as a misreading of the universe and truth claims, that only that which explains the development of evolution is deemed to be worthy of being a truth claim. So that's what I think Torrance would call an a priori. The a priori of a particular view of evolution that can only see things if it allows for the survival or success of the fittest. So it's a narrow view of evolution that excludes theistic evolution. Do you want to say something, Ken?
I jotted in the margin, if you wanted to look at a very popular exponent of this sense of perennial naturalism, where we're all insignificant parts of a giant cosmic machine that produces majestic indifference to us, our hopes and aspirations, our needs and desires, our sense of fairness or fittingness, the blind watchmaker. I jotted Kurt Vonnegut. The Slaughterhouse-Five, Cat's Cradle, and all of these books taught an entire generation of baby boomers in the United States to think, or at least entertain the thought, that we're all here by accident. It's all one big colossal mistake. Another person in that vein was the guy who wrote the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy series, where one of the titles of one of the books is The Cockroach at the center of the
Adams.
That Adams, yeah. And that was done with such charm and humor that the baby boom generation just swept that stuff up. I hope he retired well with the income from that book. But the point, all of them are writing to an attitude that they learned in school, that taught by a science that says the only thing we're going to look at here in chemistry class is molecules. The only thing we're going to look at here in biology is living tissues. The only thing we're going to look at here in physics is things in motion. We are not going to look at value or any values about it, because that we need that kind of secularity in order to do our work. I've got 32 students here. Some of them are Muslim, some of them are Buddhist, some of them are Christian, some of them are Jewish. I am not going to talk about values. I'm just going to say how you get H2O. That's what I'm going to do. And that has now left us helpless. The whole notion of why we pay any attention to the universe at all, as you were talking, Marty, is our forebears had no problem about that. They thought they'd find God. But you can't, that kind of deism didn't work. And it takes us to the parts of Tom's books where he's recapitulating the dualisms of European culture that crippled the ability of the church to adapt. until we meekly accepted the role assigned to us that we were there for women and children, to take care of the weak and the helpless, and the men would go out and build rockets and go to Mars. If you want to find exponents of what he here calls the social constructionism, you look at Elon Musk. That essentially, I will make the universe into what I want because I can. I'm that rich, and the value of the human race has no value at all. But he wants to make sure it does not go extinct on Earth, so he's going to have colonize Mars. But he has no alternative to just perpetuating the race, which is the worst kind of racism. Oh my God! Anyway, you can get me going. He's going through a popular atheism, popular social constructionists intend to be. This is not the same as Peter Berger and the social structure construction of reality.
That needs to be clarified, because you can easily think that the term would be one or the other, but
and it's not. The fact that one part of science can be attacking the epistemological roots of other parts of other sciences, that the neurosciences in particular can say, you realize everything's inside a skull, and all it is little synapses firing, and you want to talk about your apprehensions of truth in the physical universe out there in the black holes of space. I don't see how you can do that. That's within science. The technocratic rivalries that are going on and on and on and on, back and forth, and you have the same problem now in law, and we're starting to see it in medicine. That the physicalist accounts of the mind are inevitably reductive, and problems of piggybacking don't fix it. Sorry, I'm going ahead to try to find this part. Pluralism. That was the. It's a forced compromise to say, you stay where you are on your side, I'll stay where I am on my side, and we'll agree to keep talking. That is a premise that just says it's not mono, it's plural. Interesting.
Until we stop talking, and then it's become something worse than that.
Yes. Then I come for you.
Yes.
Go
ahead.
Again, this is probably because I'm not familiar with this whole area, but why I don't understand the argument that is presented about a physicalist account is necessarily reductionistic. The example that you gave, Ken, of in chemistry studying the behavior atoms, to me, understanding the behavior atoms at that level is fine. It does not need to have the hypothesis that God created the universe in mind when you're doing that. Right. Just like you're riding a bicycle, you don't need to know the value of going there someplace. You just want to learn how to ride a bicycle. And then what you do with that knowledge, whether you go, to a temple or whether something else, to me, that's on top of it, right? The multi-levels that we are seeing reality. So to me, when you're doing chemistry, I don't want the chemistry professor to talk about Hinduism and how everything is God and that the atoms are part of God. That doesn't, to me, that's irrelevant. Now, it shouldn't stop there, but I hear you saying that, like in this case, the example that is presented about M causes M star and P causes P star, the two levels of mental causing mental and physical causing physical, and that if physical causes physical, then it cannot be a mental. To me, I'm not sure of how that is a valid reasoning. I guess I'm having issue with that.
It is not because it's necessarily reductionistic. It's because it chooses to be reductionistic. So the sense of social constructivism within a purely naturalistic worldview is we can't talk about anything dealing with values or God versus Peter Berger, where it's we necessarily engage the world, and as cultures, including scientific cultures, we talk about it and we keep open to the conversation to those who deal with the mental world and those who deal with the world of religion. We won't reduce reality to it's only this and no more. So the problem is the attitude that says we have the truth and we're not even going to listen to anything else. It's Valentine's Day, and if you think that love has anything to do with the emotions, you're just crazy. It's all just chemicals and all that. So you can see it's the
And yeah,
attitude
but
of reductionism, not that it's
right,
necessary that it be reductionistic. It's that it becomes a religious commitment almost to only this and
right.
nothing more.
But the thing is, I guess the contradiction that I see there is even in the sciences, we are not reductionistic, right? We do not reduce biology to chemistry because the chemical phenomenon that we use, the tools that we use to explain chemistry, are not sufficient to explain the biological. And the same thing with chemistry down to physics, right? In principle, I guess one could say everything is reducible down to physics, but in practice, the level of complexity and the tools that we use are different. The statistical approach that is required in chemistry does not apply in, well, at the fundamental physics realm, right? So even there, we have a hard time reducing one level to the next.
Yeah.
So why is it that we think that values can be reduced to atoms? I just don't see that being a
Yeah, and it's
persuasive
Torrance's
argument.
stratification of knowledge, right?
Yeah.
So
But if
chemistry is
the
not the end, but you
underlying
have
philosophical assumption is that everything must be empirical to be true, you got to see
Uh-huh.
to believe it. Nothing in the whole page about M and P and all that stuff is observable or even testable. But people who deal with the shape and the structures and the biological processes of the brain are getting in there to raise issues and questions. And as Tom points out, there are certain ruts in intellectual life where thought tends to go. Alan Torrance, when he cites this example, is making the example of this particular argument was that somebody tried to propose creating layers so that both mental and physical could tolerate one another's presence. And immediately somebody attacked it and said, but you cannot empirically prove that distinction exists. And in fact, in most cases, it doesn't. And they start collapsing into each other. And has been very, as far as the state of the art 20 years ago when this article was written, is that that had not been resolved. And that was
right. Okay.
One brain scientist attacking another brain scientist basically on philosophical issues, because neither one of them have an M star or an M to look at under a microscope and say, oh, there it is, I see it. It's not empirical. And as I say, that was David Hume's argument 200 years ago. It's a basic problem of the observer cannot prove the existence of their own existence because they can't observe it.
But indirectly we can. That's the thing, right? I mean, the example about the reflection is, but that's why we have a mirror, right? We have a mirror that allows me to see my face so that I can comb my hair properly. And in the example of the M causes M star, to me, it seems like one resolution of that is the mental affects the physical, P, and then P causes P star, which then causes M star to happen, right? So indirectly, instead of being two separate levels that are disconnected, if there is a connection between the mental and the physical, then M causes M star is valid, except that it is mediated through the physical layer, right? Now,
I think that's Alan's point, though, isn't it? I mean, now you're into the pluralities of both mental and physical. And that's what you're.
And there are some
who
attack that entire distinction and saying, no, M and M star are chemical reactions in the brain. That's all they are.
I see.
And so
okay.
P is causing P star, and you're giving it a more glorified name. but you cannot make that distinction stick empirically because you cannot show it in a magnetic resonance imaging scanner. You can't do it.
But again, there I would say that because we cannot recognize it, we cannot observe it directly, there are many things that we cannot observe directly, right?
Yes.
In fact, we cannot even see a elementary particle directly. We can only see the trail that it leaves in in an oil chamber. And yet we see that trail and we say, oh, there's an electron that went and made that trail. So there are, at the physics level, at the fundamental physics level, we cannot see it. We can only indirectly guess that something exists.
No.
And so to me, it seems very reductionistic to assume that our mental phenomenon should be amenable to being observed in a microscope when most of reality is not, right? So to me, that requirement seems illogical to me because
you're making the point that Alan's making, though, I think.
Yes, exactly.
Okay.
Welcome. Okay. This is what theologians can teach physicists and chemists. Almost all of your most important premises you can't prove. Like I can't prove there's a God. There are ways of thinking and demonstrating. Fides can quare intellectus anytime. It's you're welcoming them back into the conversation once they've been humbled by discovering they cannot prove their own science based on their own premises. And that does not mean that their science is wrong. It just means that it is not big enough yet. It will be. Let's all get on board. The pluralism, which was, for example, is when Catholicism finally acknowledged that Protestantism was another way of being Christian. And they were actually willing to accept Protestant baptism in Catholic churches. And we were, as Protestants, well, I had always accepted Catholic marriage as valid for Protestants. That was the beginnings of pluralism in the specific area of ecumenical and church relations, which was politically important. And in some countries where there are established churches, it was really important that the secular government recognized both churches as equally valid and co-equal in their constitutions. And we have that has kept the peace for more than 100 years. What I worry about is that peace is breaking down, not between Catholics and Protestants, but between absolutists and relativists. And that's the culture wars that James Davison Hunter first identified 30 years ago in his book, Culture Wars. And this book, which I keep holding up, but I won't bother you with it again.
Reductionistic, absolutists and reductionists and relativists are both reductionists, not dealing with reality, which the second point on 199, naturalism struggles to account for the reliability of our cognitive faculties when they seek to make claims at the metaphysical or philosophical level, and thus for the claims it makes itself. Evolutionary naturalism recognizes one all-controlling governing principle, so that's absolute, namely that the evolution of all our faculties and abilities is driven by adaptation for the sake of success or fitness. So that's a kind of absolutism. And so there you have a truth that's defined by one truth, that it can't hear the truths of others, which is what I hear you appealing for. And John McMurray would say that the nature of all human knowledge is we act in the world, but first of all, we learn emotionally by just play is our first place to interact. Oh, that hurts. Oh, that tastes good. We emotionally engage the world and we come to make choices. I like that. I don't like that, so that we can begin to have values shaped on our emotional engagement in the world, which becomes our reasonableness. Reason is based on our emotion. And then our reasoning encounters things. I like this job or that kind of person and not others. And it's an emotion based on the reason we've developed, which may be intelligent, really knowing that person, or we may just go, oh, that person is a woman or Black. I'm not sure that I trust those kind of. And so because we're not in the conversation, our emotion, he calls it false emotions. It's not that we should get rid of emotions. We need to have better emotions, and we become better scientists. Tell me about yourself. How do you see the world? And so now we're doing good scientific work that acknowledges an emotional component, that has values based in it, that has reason based into it, that pursues more reason, so that we live appropriately in the face of the world. But as you're saying, it needs to be the integration of all these things in such a way that we live appropriately in the world and with other human beings. And when you only have a naturalistic reading, all of that wisdom, going back to the first of the two essays we did with Torrance, wisdom gets lost, and you're just left with a bunch of naturalistic principles. Who's going to succeed here? That loses the wisdom of what it means to be humans living in a world that can care for it.
Yeah, page 208, he takes up Nancy Cartwright and her advancing pluralism as a solution, an alternative at any rate, to pure physicalism or Cartesian dualism. I started underlining like crazy because oh, good. Oh, yes, good. One of the first things she says is what is the term? Fideism? Yeah. She accuses Cartesians and physicists as being fideists because, as Jung had said, we have to believe it's true in order to even begin our work. So you presuppose it's true just to start off. But if you've already said that's fideism and that's an improper starting point, you can't even do science. But another thing that the church, we as practiced theologians, can return to is say, well, that's not what we're doing. And it's not an improper start, but essentially you do need to assume what you need to prove and then begin a series of voyeuristic arguments in order to be able to collect enough evidence to be able to generalize it theoretically, none of which is available through experimentation. It is, you're making proposals that are rationally plausible to other people. And this is where she wants to say, this is that Torrance wants to say with Kathy Cartwright is that the church knows something about fideism, because that's what we do. That's the first accusation we make about somebody whose premises we don't understand. Oh, you just made that up. Oh, you believe it because you want it to be true, and I can reject everything you come up with because it's fideistic. You need revelation. You need proof. You need something better. And she is saying that's the best most of us can do. And if you can persuade a Cartesian that he's being fideistic, well, more power to you. If you can complain, if you can prove, and just read that over again. Anyway, but she said, if you want to have an ideal of the university where there are these two faith commitments, humanism and
Naturalism.
Thank you. You're going to have to start. You're going to have to start with a plural model, and you need to be able to demonstrate how pluralism is not just papering over differences that can never be compromised. That pluralism is in fact what you want as a practical social arrangement so that the academy can go forward.
And I would use the word duality instead of pluralism there, or plurality, which is basically T.F. Torrance's stratification of knowledge.
Yeah.
Yes, we need chemists. Yes, we need physicists. Yes, we need engineers. Yes, all of them are part of the plurality of ways that we look at the world and together understand the components, not in competition, but in collaboration together to understand the world as it exists. And so, again, when I begin this class and say, what is science? We also will go on to say, and who does science? This is Polanyi's point. Persons do science, and so we make decisions on where we're going to focus our attention in our scientific work, but we don't dismiss others because they don't fall within what it is that we're doing, but we continue as a society of explorers. So the nature of what it means to look at persons as persons in relation is something that psychology has, yet to get. So a class where I'm trying to integrate theology and psychology, I first of all have to redraw the lines and say, if we're going to look at in a Christian university what it means to do psychology, we have to begin by saying the nature of persons is beings in relation. That's who God is as Trinity. We are created as humans in relation to God and one another. So the nature of our therapeutic work has to deal with the reality of our relatedness that includes our particularity, and it includes narcissists, it includes bipolar disorders, it includes all kinds of disorders. But we also have to be able to ask the question of what is the science of what it means to be proper functioning humans, right?
Yeah, something
As a
normative.
dentist, as a dentist, you have all kinds of teeth that come through that door. And some of them do very little care and their teeth do fine. And others, they take really good care of it. They still get cavities and teeth that go every which way. And so you have to say, we're going to deal with you as you are, but we have a sense of what oral health and all of that looks like. And many dentists catch cancer in people because they take the time to stop and test a few things to see if there are signs of it. So there's a sense in which the physical sciences can be profoundly connected to the nature of health, what it looks like, which dental, I mean, the fact that I'm married to a dentist helps, but to say there's no scientific discipline that has done the job that dentistry has done to get people every day to practice twice a day something committed towards a view of health that's a value of keeping your teeth healthy, your smile able to be seen, and to really educate people that there is a value to taking care of your teeth, and it's social and it's physical and it's personal and all these levels. So there's just it's a very interesting piece of seeing the duality of what dentistry is able to do that many other scientific disciplines don't do. Psychology has not been able to get to that particularly well because insurance will pay for the diagnosis that fits the diagnostic manual for which insurance is willing to make repayment. There is no definition of health in the diagnostic manual.
Oh.
Right.
Yeah.
And to say happy or something like that doesn't do what's necessary. So we just haven't done the scientific work there because of the problem that this article is pointing out. We haven't been able to recognize there are physical and mental and personal and relational components to our humanity, even as scientists, that we need to acknowledge.
Yeah.
I want to study these things because my grandfather had polio, right? And so it's of interest to me. Or I have a relative with Alzheimer's, and so it's particular interest to me. I want to study how do we deal with the physicality of that, and maybe there are other components too. But we're not going to be limited. We're going to pursue the use of the tools to explore every aspect of social, physical aspects to achieve something. But it's a view of families and humans and what does health look like that has values built into it, right? I mean, the value piece is an important one, I think, Ken, you talk about. And to recognize, to say to people, every time you act in any way, the fact that you're here today, you said yes to being here and no to somewhere else, that's a value.
Yeah.
Every choice we make has a value, a yes and a no. But if we don't pay attention to why we say yes and why we say no, in here, I loved his phrase, vote or veto. Vote is yes, veto is no. We live constant lives of voting and vetoing, but we won't talk about what we do and why we do those things, and why the scientists and why those who are involved in the social sciences, why they do what they do, or what the outcomes are in helping humanity to survive and be respectful, and all those kinds of things. It's not on the menu. And if we started with kindergartners talking about personal relationships, how do you listen to somebody? How do you negotiate? How do you ask them what they mean by the words that they're using? Just clarification. Just think how much better the process of just going K through 12 would be if there were some basic social skills of how to relate to other human beings that then would become valuable in their workplace and their family relationships. But where does that happen? I did take in my AA
It's
program, there was a class on personal relationships, and it did have a few things, but that's about the only place that it was, and that was just an option to take. It wasn't a required course. So it's just not on the menu. The sciences have not included what I say is the most important thing to deal with. And therefore, to say we're living in the pandemic of the personal and we don't even know it. Except you keep seeing the numbers of depression and suicide and loneliness keep going up and up. And it's like, well, this is a pandemic that people are caught in this world where they can't see it because the view of the two pictures that we have here haven't noticed the importance of this piece together. And I think what Alan calls the theistic worldview foundationally has built into it the nature of the personal.
The first, I mean, this particular essay is a stitching together of three separate essays that Torrance wrote. One of them really is the first one is just the academy, that the academy is not able to work through, has not been able to work through, and it is getting destructive.
Right.
Then the second part, he looks at several theorists about how we can overcome this dilemma, the non-reductive physicalism, and that's where we have been for the last hour or so. Then finally, he tacks on at the end a similar thing, because it was proposed that maybe anthropology, looking at what the human is, might create platforms and perspectives from which we can then go to help solve this. And he says, well, you might be, but I don't see it.
This was Alan Torrance's doctoral dissertation.
Mm-hmm.
Persons in community, Trinitarian description and human participation. So, I mean, just to show how important the issue is for him, that leads to that point you're making, Ken.
On 211 and 212, he lays out 8 premises based on Strawson's argument. And up until about point 6, I was following him just fine. But then he would chime in and say, true self-determination is therefore logically impossible. I'm going, all right, must be a flaw in one of these premises, because now you've ended up with an absurdity as the conclusion. And that's where Alan Lewis says, essentially, if you're going to talk about the free self as self-caused, you got a real problem to defend freedom, not least a robust notion of responsible academic or intellectual freedom, because you cannot provide it with a rational basis. You just have to assume it in order to prove it. Does that mean everybody who comes into Harvard every fall has to be told to assume something is true, anything is true, and then welcome to Harvard and spend 4 years here trying to figure out what's really true for you? And because we're all going to be in the faculty lounge enjoying our coffee.
But will they be enjoying it? That's the question.
No, well, actually, they probably won't, because somebody would crawl in through the window saying, this is a racist, sexist, anti-Semitic institution. Out you go. Let's see. This does not, and in and of itself, overcome Galen Strawson's arguments, but would appear to open the door to a non-linear account of the causality inherent in personal agency. So there's that model of M causes M star and P causes P star. Linear. Descartes assumed linear. But I think nowadays, especially as
it's open and complex. I mean, a Torrancean open, complex, multi-strata.
And the more we get into artificial intelligence, the more they begin to say, no, we're not teaching them to think linearly. To think linearly, we're trying to teach it to be questioning its questions and going from there. And people experienced in interacting with AI know that the first thing you ask AI is, how do you know what you just told me is true? What are your sources? Where did you get that? Is there some other way to come to other conclusions? And AI goes and chugs on that. I find it interesting that one of the things about open-ended systems is they consume huge amounts of energy and money. And we are bulldozing acres and acres of land just to set up computer servers to cogitate like this, when we have more horsepower in our skulls than they can build out there on those farms. So this is forcing us to examine our own non-linear ways of thinking, and I think eventually we'll discover it might have been when humanity evolved as a species to a point where we were able to do that we really began to be able to do philosophy and move out from living in the trees to living in cities and towns. I don't know that, but the point here is that it's Alan Torrance is saying something, you're presuming a certain linearity in your models of how rational stuff gets done. Maybe you need to think non-linearly, because that does
the word
actually
contingently apply there.
Yes.
Yeah.
Or
So again,
the tacit dimension.
Yes.
Yep,
Yes.
yep.
Everything we
The
have
problem-
been learning for a century or more about proper religious and theological thinking is transferable to the academy if the academy is willing to listen.
Yeah. I mean, getting to your language, the AI, the large language models, to me, the problem with them is, I mean, the advantage of them is that they are able to ingest huge amounts of textual information and then process it and give you back.
Mhm.
That's where the energy is going. But the problem is that it is purely textual. It does not understand, in a human sense, anything. It's just doing a probabilistic match of what the next word should be.
Yeah.
So I have my deep skepticism that it'll do anything beyond that. But I think the fundamental philosophical issue is that because it's explicit, right? It's textual. There is no tacit as in the Polanyian sense, which is where a lot of these understandings have to come out of, right? I mean, even mathematics, where the so-called proofs are the most central part of it, the axioms that you start out with are given. You have to intuit them. You have to accept them as true, and then from them you can then prove everything else. But how do you prove the axioms themselves? You cannot.
No.
You have to justify it by experience or other, informal kind of reasoning.
Yeah,
So
that Gödel's theorem.
yes,
Every system must include at least one premise that is not derived from the system.
right. If it's consistent, yeah.
If it's to make it meaningful. It does tell me that true self-determination is logically impossible. For the moment, I'm going to cling to that because it means AI cannot turn into Frankenstein or Hal computer anytime soon.
There's no guarantees on that, but
no, that's why I'm clinging with like two fingers.
I see. So you're a Klingon.
But that's right. That's because
that means your mother is a sow.
That's okay. I've done software development for many years and studied computer science. So the thing is, this is kind of like related to the Gödel theorem, right? When you have a deterministic system, which is what a computer program most of the time is, let's avoid the non-determinism that's brought up because of distributed systems and things like that. When you have a deterministic system, then by definition, it is not self-determining, right? Because the program has been written to do a deterministic thing. So yeah, by definition, you cannot do that. It's just that people try to escape that by adding probabilistic thing, like large language models. And so it appears superficially that it's more like a person because they're not giving the same answer every time. But even there, one could say, well, it's just a probability distribution that is deterministic now at the second level. Kind of like quantum mechanics is not deterministic in the classical Newtonian sense, but we still think of it as deterministic because the equations are fully determined. So
Yeah.
I mean, it gets a little bit fuzzier at that point.
And then Tom in theological science points out that a 5-year-old knows more physics, as much physics as a person 25, 30 years in the business. And that is true of most human children.
Yes.
If they
The way they acquire knowledge of the physical world. Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Informally, intuitively. Yeah.
Yeah. And I don't know if it's possible to train a non-organic thought system
Well,
to do that.
that's why there's interest in robotics, because people have recognized that in order for a computer intelligence to develop, they have to interact with the real world. And how do you interact with the real world? Well, they're going to produce a robot that is controlled and that has receptors, and that they'll then learn about the real world the way a child learns through these various inputs. To me, that seems like another 10 orders of magnitude more energy required to do it.
Yes.
So that in principle it may be correct, but in reality we may not have the computing resources needed to replicate what a human child has in their brain. So
the research needs to go into how is it that we can hold all this computing power inside one skull, and you can't build an artificial intelligence computer farm big enough to do even the secondary kinds of logical processes that we do routinely. How is that? We don't need to go there to finish this discussion because again, Marty, thank you for bringing.
I want to read there's 2 paragraphs right at the end of the article I just want to finish off with. So on 214 at the bottom, Christian theists must always remain on guard lest they fall into the trap of postulating a God of the gaps, that is, where God is defined in such a way as to plug the gap in our present understanding of things, and where the God we worship becomes a crude product of our attempts to salve our own ignorance. At the same time, it is entirely appropriate for them to affirm that the complexity of the world is irreducible to anything other than the simplest explanation of all, namely the God who has created persons for personal communion with himself, with each other, and indeed with all other sentient beings, which contribute to the richness of the world as we know it. So again, here's his argument that there's a dimension we want to avoid and one that we want to pursue. And then the last paragraph, Christian theism does not therefore begin from naturalistic premise and then seek to work up to a fuller account of the person. Rather, it begins from a position that recognizes that human beings are complex realities, which I think you were saying, Young Il, that they are, however, not objects, but subjects, eyes, who are free, responsible, personal agents, who not only pray, love, think, reason, guess, and hypothesize, but have the capacity to penetrate heuristically the intelligible structures of the contingent order, here TF there. These are beings who grow and develop physically, emotionally, and intellectually, and where the latter seems to be intrinsically connected to the development of its neurological components. It also recognizes that we are beings whose emotions can be chemically induced, whose moral consciences appear to be soluble in alcohol, and whose memories and intellectual capacities degenerate with physical deterioration. We are beings who die, but, as the Christian faith suggests, stand to be raised from death to life by the one who created the totality of the contingent order from nothing. This requires Christian theism to hold that we have an identity or I-ness which can die and be raised. If this task appears a challenging one, it should be clear that it is one no more challenging than the task that the secular academy has to face if it is to make sense of itself from within its diverse, plural, and too often internally inconsistent premises, which defines its present shape and character. So we have challenges, but we also have something to build on. And I think the nature of the person and the way we engage the world, all the things we were talking about, what a computer can't do, what AI can't do, those are all the things that we have not studied well, but they are what make us persons in relation. And so we as persons in relation, T.F. Torrance is going to say, can be good scientists. We can engage all of reality, both the world of thought and the world of the physical and the world of God. And we are going to be better off if we are inclusive of all those things. So I hear in this article a plea for recognizing roads that shouldn't be taken, and the road less traveled is the one that makes the most sense, has the most stability in light of who we are as persons, knowing persons in the world. And the Academy has an opportunity to recognize this and to include broader conversations that don't exclude the naturalists or the social sciences or the social constructivists, but maybe to be more Peter Berger-ish on that side. And this was T.F. Torrance's complaint that the social sciences have not done yet what the physical sciences have done. They do have a sense via Einstein to see the reality of the whole. The social sciences still are breaking things down into the head. So they have a hangover of Descartes and Kant that has a locked away sense of the mind that is not doing the work of the integrative connective piece that needs to be there. So anyway, just a bit of a pulling together. Is there anything else that we want to throw out? Other people will be watching this, so I just want to harvest the thoughts to leave. If there are other things that came up for you in that final statement to pass on to others.
I did want to stress, because Alan Torrance stresses it, that even though you can demonstrate that Christian theology can be useful to the academy, that is not a natural theological argument for the existence of God. This is not traditional natural theology. He's not interested in that. He's simply saying we are one participant at the table, the way Karl Barth used to talk about being an ambassador for the other side. But in a discussion where they are one participant among many, and we should not allow these kinds of arguments. Well, sorry, allowance sounds too authoritarian. We should watch out, because we
don't create battles. Enter in, be all of yourself with your views, and listen well and interact well. I mean,
there is that rut in modern in American Christianity that every time science and Christianity get together, the Christians start looking for a natural theology that the scientists have discovered, but didn't realize it, and now the Christian can run in and show them that in fact you've just proved the existence of God, which is not what this paper is about. Not what this paper is about.
But we should all be at the table.
Yeah.
And there is corrective work that happens. And what?
And bring the right fork.
Or spoon. Any thoughts, Young Il?
Fascinating. And the question that I wanted to raise, I mean, we don't have time right now, but what Ken mentioned about the conflict between the absolutist and the relativist.
Yes.
I'm just curious whether is that, I mean, just thinking about it, it seems like maybe we are as a culture asking those, getting into those kind of divisions because the world has been at so-called peace for so many years. We have eradicated a lot of diseases, poverty, and so on. And so our living standards have gotten so well compared to the 19th century, 15th century, the first century, that human existence has become so easy for many of us that now we are looking for something like this, and then we get kind of trapped into these, less significant issues. I'm not sure.
Yeah. Well, if my sense is right, we are sitting in a place of a fracturing that goes beyond, where polarizing is part of it, but even within the polarizing is a deeper level of fracturing, that we're just losing our ability to listen to each other, so we become more distant, and the very fabric of society is unraveling at some level. So I think this is just one manifestation in the academy of what is a multi-layered issue to be dealt with. And not saying it was ever perfect or great. And we've just been on journeys of wrestling. John McMurray said, the West, we are basically Romans at heart. We love to control the world. The nature of the Roman apperception is build an empire to control the world. We love that. We are Greek secondarily because we want to think about it. We want rational things to think about it, but that's a secondary motivation. Control comes first, contemplation comes second. He says the Roman Catholic Church for centuries echoed Rome's concern to control the world and all of its many layers of the church. The Greek Orthodoxy manifests the world of Greek Christianity, thinking about the world through icons and transcending the world through worship, but not becoming a force in the world. He said, the world has yet to see a Christianity that what he calls the Hebrew apperception of a people who only existed because of God, where their identification is not a land or a political structure. It's a acknowledgement. We exist because we are made by a person to be persons. He says, we have yet to see that kind of Christianity. Protestantism was started by an Augustinian monk. Guess what Protestants have done? They've tried to control and divided and fractured over that. But they are more Roman than anything else. Maybe the Pentecostals and some others have experiences of things that aren't as controlling. But nevertheless, to say the world has yet to see a form of Christianity where valuing the whole and the particular, what with love as the dominant motif and not the fear of losing control or the fear of being wrong, which those are the two motifs of the Roman and the Greek apperception. There's a lot to be learned, and we've made a lot of mistakes, and we've also done some things right. So if the wheels don't fly off the wagon, we shall see. But I think these kind of conversations help us to at least identify where do we potentially go wrong and what are the avenues forward. Well, good. Well, thank you for being here today. Next week will be our final session with Jerome Ben Kuyken on theological science. So that would be great to look forward to and culminate that. And cruise on through summer. Here goes July, the 24th.
Yeah. Yes.
Thank you for being here today. Thank you, Tim O'Silent, one in the background, for being here with us today. So we will look forward to seeing you, and I'll get this video up soon so that other people can join in reflection and conversation. Have a great day.
Thank you, Marty.
You bet.
Thank you, Marty.
You bet.